Well, hello again, kids. It's time to continue our story. Remember, what's the story? It's the story of the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And why does it just keep going? Because the risen Jesus is still alive in the church, right? He is still alive in our midst, and we see his presence. We see him at work in lots of different ways throughout the church, throughout history, especially in the lives of his saints. So as we keep going through the story of how the risen Jesus has worked throughout history, throughout the church, even though he is ascended to heaven, he sent his Holy Spirit to be with us, right? We're going to continue the story. We kind of did a special episode, if you will, of the story last time by talking about the different ways the different times that he sent his mother to appear to us, some of them anyway, to help us out along the way. But we then ended the part before it, right, with the first time that anyone saw a vision that included his mother, right? At least the first time that we know of, right? And that was St. John, right? Well, St. John, like I said, is the last of the apostles, and after St. John goes home to Jesus, then that begins a whole new era of the church in which there's lots of different saints that do a lot for Christ and for his church. A lot of them, like the apostles, like most of the apostles. Remember, St. John was the only one of them who wasn't martyred, right? Who didn't give his life for Jesus. In the form of being martyred, right? Well, there will be lots of martyrs in the early church. People like Saints Perpetua and Felicity, among others, people like Saint Ignatius of Antioch. Saint Ignatius of Antioch, who was a disciple of Saint John, so he was a follower of Saint John. He would also be a part of another group of saints that there would be a lot of them that we typically call them the fathers. They were leaders and shepherds, spiritual fathers to God's people. And a lot of what they did was they helped to clarify the truth and make sure that people received the truth of who Jesus is, right? And that good news that of Jesus Christ, of who he is and of what he really taught, gets passed down. And a lot of times they experienced a lot of resistance and a lot of people that were wanting to spread false teachings, people that would want to say, well, I don't think Jesus was really God, or I don't think Jesus was really human, or that they would call into question the idea of the Holy Trinity, or I don't think we should call Mary the mother of God. And of course that doesn't make sense because Jesus is God and Mary is Jesus' mother, right? So all of these fathers had to clarify these teachings, and sometimes they encountered a lot of resistance. Sometimes bad things happened to them because of the people who were opposing them. But so they suffered a lot so that you and I could know the real Jesus, so that you and I could know who Jesus is, right? And what he taught, and the gift that he gave us in the church and in the sacraments and in the Gospels. And so there's a whole era of saints. Truly awesome. Some of them were martyrs. Some of them were teachers. Some of them were converts, like St. Augustine, a man who for a long time didn't believe in Jesus, right? And wanted to pursue success in the world and pursue happiness in the world. And in all these ways that he eventually discovered didn't lead him to happiness and to truth. There's people like St. Patrick in that time who carried the gospel to far-off lands that hadn't received the gospel yet, especially to Ireland, which we think of Ireland as a Catholic country today, but because of St. Patrick, right? And so we're going to jump forward to the next saint that I want to focus on, or set of two saints that I want to focus on. Are sort of maybe toward the end of that era, okay? They were born in the 500s, in the late 500s, and lived into the late 400s into the early 500s, okay? And this is a brother and a sister named Saint Benedict. That's Saint Benedict. And his sister Saint Scholastica, okay? So Benedict and Scholastica, truly, truly awesome story. So we'll start with Benedict, right? So keep in mind, Benedict and Scholastica, like I said, they're brother and sister, and they really helped each other to love Jesus more, right? Because as brothers and as sisters, that's one of the most important things that we can do, is help each other and encourage each other to love Jesus more and to follow Jesus more closely. And Benedict felt called to follow Jesus in an especially important way. So after so many people had struggled and suffered and encountered difficulties in the world, and people like St. Augustine, who, like I said, he found out the hard way that all the money and wealth and pleasures that the world offered him would never make him happy, right? And so St. Benedict would have a similar experience of realizing that even though he and his sister were born to a wealthy family, and they could have enjoyed the good things that the world kind of dives into and thinks will make them happy, Benedict knew that only Jesus would make him happy, right? And so what he felt called to do is to just remove himself from the world as much as possible, to just stay close to Jesus. And that doesn't mean that he did nothing. He worked hard. In fact, one of his mottos, his main motto, is prayer and work, right? So he worked hard to serve others, but he wanted to live a life that was kind of alone with Jesus. Not completely alone, right? But that he wasn't going to look to the world to satisfy him, because he knew that only Jesus would make him happy, right? The world will offer us all kinds of things, claiming that it'll make us happy, but only Jesus is going to make us happy, right? And so he went to live at a church for a little while, and then as he grew closer to Jesus, Jesus started working miracles through him, right? And so people were really drawn to him, and so he withdrew away from the world even more, right? And went to live kind of out in the wilderness, right? And he went up this steep cliff. But then more and more people, God sent more and more people to him. Why? Because he wasn't seeking to get people to follow him. He just wanted to love Jesus and to do God's will. And so because of that, Jesus honored what he was doing so much. He knew that Benedict loved him and just wanted to do his will. And so he knew that a lot of us needed to learn from Benedict, right? And so a lot of people were called to go out and seek out Benedict and follow the way of life that he was teaching them, which was all about living totally for Jesus, right? You see these words over his head there, ora et labora, right? That just means prayer and work, right? If our life was that simple, that we devote our lives to prayer and work, right? And so a lot of people followed him, and he ended up getting to write a rule of life that a lot of religious orders, for people who have felt called to this kind of way of life, for generations have followed this rule of life either in part or in whole, and it's become kind of a model for lots of religious orders. And as we continue these different parts of the story, we're going to see that God brings a lot of beautiful diversity into his church throughout history, especially in the form of different religious orders that are going to rise up. And Benedict is one of the earliest stable and strong and lasting religious orders, would be what we call today the Benedictines, that he founded. And he didn't found it because he wanted followers. Remember, he just wanted to love Jesus. And Jesus knew that the more that he was seeking him, the more a lot of us would need to learn from him and follow him. And so not only did he follow the people, or did he lead the people that directly followed him in his day, as he set up a monastery in a place called Monte Cassino, not only did he lead the people there, but that he set up this rule of life so that people, even in future generations, could learn from how he was learning to follow Jesus more closely in this special way of life called monasticism, a way that's removed from the world, knowing that the world is never going to satisfy us, is never going to make us happy, and the church needs people to just devote themselves to praying for us and working hard in different ways that will serve the community and serve God's people, right? And so his sister, of all people, would be someone who would recognize that, Benedict is onto something, and she would want to devote herself to the same kind of way of life, and that's Scholastica, right? And Scholastica, so then if Benedict becomes the father of Western monasticism, or the father of monks in the West, right? He would be a model for religious brothers, and she then would be the first religious sister of the Benedictines, of the Benedictine order, right? And she would take care of all the women who were called to this religious life in this new religious order that Benedict was beginning to establish, right? And meanwhile, because the nuns lived in their home and the monks lived in their home, they didn't necessarily see each other a lot, but they loved each other a lot, and they cared for each other, and they prayed for each other. And you know what? They would meet about once a year in this house that was somewhere between the house where the monks lived and the house where the nuns lived, right? And the last time that they ever met there's a beautiful story, and it was the last time they ever met there because Scholastica went home to Jesus just about 3 days later, right? And it was getting late, and Benedict knew that it was time for him and his brothers to go home, right? To go back to their home. And Scholastica was really enjoying their time together, and she loved her brother, and she loved to spend time talking about Jesus with her brother, right? And sharing their faith in Jesus with her brother. And she knew that this was a really blessed time that they were given to spend time together, to grow in their faith together. And she said, Benedict, stay, don't go anywhere, right? And Benedict was like, no, sister, I've got to go. And so, you may know this story, I love this story. Scholastica bows her head and prays. And then a big, massive storm comes that's so powerful that Benedict and his brothers can't go anywhere, right? And so Benedict starts saying, sister, what have you done? What have you done? And she just sort of smiles and she says, you didn't listen. So I asked God and he listened, right? So I love that story, kids, for a lot of reasons. But I think it can be especially helpful for us right now, because I bet you a lot of brothers and sisters are spending more time together right now, and maybe sometimes feeling like here's this thing that's outside of our control, like a big storm that just came out of nowhere, and we can be upset about that, and we can be sad about that, and we need to talk to Jesus about that. But guess what? In the midst of that, Jesus is giving us a lot of gifts. And I think one of the gifts that he's giving is that he's giving families, brothers and sisters, as well as their mothers and fathers, time to be together, right? Just like Scholastica knew that time with her brother was cherished, and she didn't want to lose it, right? And so ask St. Benedict and St. Scholastica to pray for you and for your family, especially if you feel like, it's been a lot of weeks and maybe I'm getting tired of this and who knows what's going to happen next and how long this is all going to last and what the next step is going to be like and all of that. Just ask St. Benedict and St. Scholastica to help you to cherish this time, right? Time with your family, but also time that you can help one another to grow in your faith, that you can pray together, read Bible stories together, read saint stories together, watch some great Bible stories and saint stories, maybe on Formed or other places that you find them, right? So that you can grow in your faith together, right? Saint Benedict and Saint Scholastica show us that living a life that's seems kind of closed in, kind of apart from the world, can actually be a time, even if it's for a short period of time, it can be a time of of great growth where God's grace can be at work, and he can help us to really learn to pray and to serve him in a really awesome life. So let's ask St. Benedict and St. Scholastica to pray for all of us. And I'll see you next time when we continue the story. God bless.